Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at 5 NBA role players who would have been stars in the 1990s. Before we start, a couple of notes are this list is not in any particular order, and when I list these players, I will 1. Tell people why they should have been a player in the 1990s and why their game fits into that era. 2, I'll be giving them a stat line prediction for if they played in that era, and I will be giving them a player comparison for who they would have played like in the 1990s. But let's get right on to the video now that we've gotten that all out of the way. First, we have Norton Powell, who plays for the Portland Trail Blazers. Although the reason he would have been great in the 1990s is because he's a 6'4" small forward, and he sometimes gets pushed around a lot by other forwards that he has to guard. But if he was in the 1990s, he would have been perfect. A lot of forwards were undersized back then, so Powell would have been great. He also has the mid-range game of a 1990s player, like a lot of the best players in the 1990s. But unlike most NBA guards and forwards of this era, Powell can play extremely good defense. Even though his stats might not look like it, he's just a very good defender and is always in the right place at the right time, which is what a lot of 1990s defenders and mid-range scorers would do. He would probably average something like 24 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. That's just how good Norton Powell is, and he could have been a great player in the 1990s, making like 4 All-Star appearances. Norton Powell could have been a great player like Glenn Rice, who was one of the best scorers in the 1990s, who could get the job done. He was a 6'4" small forward / guard like Norton Powell is, with the defense as well. Powell has all the tools to be one of the best players in the 1990s. He's got the offensive game. He takes very efficient shots, unlike most NBA players now who chuck up threes from like 36 feet. Powell either shoots very short threes or is incredibly great from inside the paint and can hit jumpers from 10 feet. So I really don't have any con about Norton Powell being in the 1990s. He's a great all-around player who can do it all, and any team in the 1990s would love to have him. Like the Minnesota Timberwolves would have loved to have this guy. The next player we're going to talk about is Ennis Cantor. He's a very good player, but he gets pushed around a lot on defense, even though he can rebound the ball and is a very efficient scorer on offense. But because pick and roll defenses weren't very common in the 1990s, I think Cantor would be great. He wouldn't have to worry about getting destroyed by the other team's guards off switches, because back in that era, the NBA liked to be more of a one-on-one league, and Cantor would only have to guard the centers, who are not as dangerous on the offensive end. Unless he was guarding someone like Karl Malone or Hakeem Olajuwon, he would be fine. He probably would have averaged something like 25 points, 12 rebounds, and 3 assists per game to go along with like 1 block a game and 0.5 steals. He would have been great, and I think his efficiency on both ends would have been great too. But also, nobody cared about analytics in that era, so that would have given him a big advantage, so teams did not give up on him so easily. He could have been sort of like Brad Daughtry. I mean, they're the same height, and Daughtry was not the most efficient player on defense, but he could score the ball extremely well, just like Cantor can. Cantor would have been great in the 1990s, and I think he would have made like 6 All-Star appearances. He's literally that good for that era. He has all the tools to be a great center in the 1990s. I mean, I think he could have been top 5 center. The next player we're going to be talking about is Harrison Barnes. Barnes, throughout his career, has been a great role player and was even one of the best players for those Dallas Mavericks teams in the late 2010s. Barnes can literally do it all. He's one of those do-it-all type of players who can hit threes, and he's a pretty good defender too. The reason he would have been great for the 1990s is he's a pretty bulky guy at about 6'9", but he's also a great shooter and defender, which not many teams had in that era at that height and that weight. because nowadays in the NBA, most every forward can shoot, so Barnes would have been an anomaly back then. He's very normal now, but any team would have loved to have him in the mid-1990s. But aside from his shooting and defense, Barnes is also an excellent slasher and can get to the basket as well. His comparison is probably Grant Hill. Hill was a great shooter, but he was also one of the best defenders for his position in that era, and he could basically do it all on the basketball court and was way ahead of his era, so maybe Barnes could have been great, just like Hill. Barnes probably would have averaged something like 24 points, 6 boards, and 4 assists a game. He probably also would have averaged like 1 steal per game and 1 block. He would have been an all-around player that could do it all, sort of like Larry Johnson of the Charlotte Hornets. He can catch lobs, and he can pretty much do anything on defense along with his offensive skill set of everything. He's a guy who can score from all 3 levels. The next player is Patrick Beverley, who is on this list for obvious reasons. Beverly is a great defender, and in the NBA today, not a lot of guards are really great defenders, but Beverly is an anomaly. He's not the best scorer, but he's one of the best defenders in the league. He consistently averages about 2 steals per game every single year, and he could have averaged like 12 points, 7 rebounds, and like 2 steals per game, and maybe even 5 assists per game too, because he's a great passer and he's one of the most underrated assistmen in the NBA. He's not the best shooter, but he's a great defender and can really light it up when he slashes to the hoop, and that's okay because a lot of 90s players were great defenders. I mean, look at Joe Dumars. He got 1 steal a game pretty much every season of his career, and he was also pretty good with slashing, and he would consistently average about 16 points a game for his entire career. Now, I don't think Beverly would have averaged that many points, but he still would have been a pretty great player, averaging like 12 or 13 points a game. But also his defense would have been great too, and a team that was not so great in the 1990s on defense, like the Denver Nuggets, could have used him to be one of the best defensive guards in the league. He makes defense look so effortless, and because of hand checking being allowed back then, Beverly would have been great. He could have touched players all he wanted and not get fouls. The next player we're going to be talking about is Jae Crowder, who has bounced around a lot of teams in the league. Sure, I know what you're thinking. He's a great shooter, but that's exactly the reason he is on the list. And you're like, Hyper Hooper, what? Why would you say that? And I'm like, well, Jae Crowder is one of the best shooters in the game right now. He's a great forward that can light it up from beyond the arc. And just like Harrison Barnes, who is also on the list, any 90s team would have loved to have a shooter like him, because as I said with Harrison Barnes, not a lot of 90s teams had a great shooter like Jae Crowder at the forward position, but he can also defend really well and is one of the best two-way players in the game right now. So if he played in the 1990s, I think he would have probably averaged a stat line like 21 points, 5 rebounds, and maybe even 3 assists per game to go along with 1 steal. He would have been a guy maybe like Larry Bird, except not as dominant, of course. And because of his skill set, he probably would have gone like 3rd in the NBA draft because of how great he is. And he's really an anomaly. He really should have played in the 1990s, and I think he would have been really, really good, even though a lot of people are probably disagreeing with me in the comments right now, saying, why would you put him in the 90s? But that's just my opinion. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Click subscribe, turn notifications on, like, share, comment, all the good stuff, and as always, I'm your boy Hyper Hooper Basketball, and we're out.